Today, we're breaking down the four biggest mistakes investors make when creating an ETF only portfolio, from jumping on the latest trends to over diversifying. And yes, this happens more frequently than you'd think. We'll unpack what to look out for and how to build smarter, stronger portfolios. Joining me today is Alexandra Gorewicz, a portfolio manager at TD Asset Management. Welcome to the podcast, Alex. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you, Isabella. It's great to be here.
Awesome. I saw you speak on TD's Money Talk, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, I need Alex as a guest on this podcast. So here we are.
A video podcast. I know I made a joke about that earlier, but yeah, this is super cool. I love it.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right into it. ETFs are constantly making headlines, and new products are launching all the time, to the point where actually there's more ETFs in the US right now than there are individual stocks,
Which is wild.
right?
Yeah.
So, with that, how should someone decide if a new ETF actually fits into their portfolio rather than it just being kind of the hot pick of the moment?
So I would say there are two key things that come to mind, right? When you're investing, you're trying to solve for something. Like, what is your goal with the investment? Are you trying to save for this like great trip in a couple of years, or are you trying to save for a down payment on your first property, let's say in like 5 to 10 years from now? How you're going to invest will differ, but the premise of investing is suitability. And as a portfolio manager, I think a lot of people might be surprised that I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out what is a suitable investment for a particular strategy that I manage, because I manage a lot of different types of strategies. So we have to be sure that the sources of return, the risks that we're taking, the markets that we're playing in are appropriate for the particular strategy. And there's a lot of financial innovation in markets constantly, even in really established markets like bond markets. So it's important to constantly do due diligence. It's not just a one-time exercise. Um, the other part that I think about, though, is also liquidity, and this kind of goes hand in hand with this concept of like, what are you trying to solve for? Because, when I think about hot trends, like think back to meme stocks, I guess they're still kind of a thing. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, they pop up every.
That's right. They pop up every so often, but I feel like a couple of years ago, there were new ETFs that were launched, and unfortunately, they didn't get critical mass with investor base. And so, if you're thinking that you're one of those investors that went in there and now you can't get your money out, but you need it for something that for some financial goal that you had for this year or next year, yeah, you're in a bit of a pickle.
Exactly. Kind of an analogy that comes to mind for me is like that one friend who always tries a new restaurant the week it opens. And so it's either, it can be really good or it can just be overhyped. And the same thing goes with ETFs when they launch like that first week, you got to really do your due diligence and understand what you're investing in.
Yeah, 100%.
Which kind of leads into our next point, where on the surface, ETFs might seem quite simple, but they can be pretty complex, and not all ETFs are created equal. So my next question is for you. What are some key things that investors should look out for and like look under the hood when deciding which ETF to add to their portfolio?
So there are a couple of like key criteria, but this is not an exhaustive list by any means. Right. So when you think about an investment vehicle, one of the first questions that I would have is it active or is it passive? Right. And really passive basically means you're trying to track a particular benchmark or a particular index. And active would mean, hopefully you're trying to outperform it. But that leads to sort of the next point, which is what is that benchmark? What is that index? So understanding really the market, the geography, the asset class that you're playing in, extremely important. And then this is probably one of the sort of newer trends with like ETFs, and that is introducing leverage. I think that's extremely important because that also ties into performance expectations. Again, if it's an actively managed product and you can take leverage, but the ETF is only generating index like returns, like, well, you got to really understand how that manager is investing. You and I were talking a little bit about when we were trading stories about, what we did like after graduation or, starting to work. Well, when I moved out on my own after graduation, um, I couldn't afford, putting up my place with anything other than a plant, and I thought, well, like, how hard could this possibly be? And
It's
it turns
just a
out it's
plant.
just a plant, and it turns out it was a lot harder. Like, there was considerations about, watering the plant and how much sunlight and, like, put it in the shade or, oh, indirect sunlight or, oh, it turns out, like, I liked, camping in the summer and I was away quite a bit and there's no one to take care of it. Like, in order f it's the same thing with investing, right? In order for that plant to thrive, in order for your investing to thrive, you really have to understand all those, like, different, like, little minutia, all the little criteria. Otherwise, yeah, I'm ashamed to say a few plants did not make it.
It's okay. I feel like with time you learn from your mistakes too, and you grow, and now I'm sure you have a green thumb.
I wouldn't call it a green thumb, but I'm doing okay. I could grow some veggies and herbs now.
Amazing. That's one more than me, so that's good.
Okay, great.
I guess another component when looking under the hood, one of these criterias would be actually fees as well. So ETFs in general are known for being low cost, but these fees can still add up. So there was actually a study done that showed that only a 1% annual fee difference can cost you 30% of your returns.
Yeah, that's an eye-popping number.
Indeed, it is. So, in your view, like when is it worth paying a bit more for an ETF? And when should investors stick to the lowest cost options?
So it probably goes back to one of those factors I mentioned earlier, which is active versus passive, right? So obviously, if the manager is trying to outperform and it's an actively managed strategy, you're probably going to be charged more. And assuming that they're able to deliver on that, then, that's, again, something that needs to be taken into account in that due diligence process. And then, probably another consideration would be niche market or niche asset class or maybe even niche sector, something that's not very mainstream as a strategy or as like a target sort of investment. I think that is where you would probably expect to see higher costs as well.
Mhm. I feel like you can kind of bring that back to think about it in the way where it's like paying $5 for a latte every single day for 30 years and never having the opportunity to drink that latte. So that's how quickly and quietly fees can add up over time, as an example.
Yeah, and there's another like personal way that I think about it, and that is, the utility of a lot of the subscriptions in our lives, right? When I think back to like when I was in my 20s, like we didn't have anywhere near the level of subscription that exists today to access, you know, um, like media, whether it's like magazines, TV shows, movies. Um, and if you're not using them, if you're not, being actively involved in them, like that's a lot of cost that you're incurring for what?
And they will add up. And like over the first year or two, you might not notice it, but 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, it'll be like, whoa,
Yeah, I spent a lot of money.
where did that money go?
That's right.
So, a lot of people believe that the more ETFs you own, the more diversified you are. And this is not always the case. So, how can an investor tell whether they are truly diversified?
So now I'm at the stage in my life where I have young kids and I spend a lot of time on the playground. So my analogies usually are around something on the playground, like a seesaw, right? So this is really simple, but if you observe over, let's say, a couple of weeks on a daily basis that one of your ETFs is going up and the other one's going down, and then let's say the next day they go vice versa. So again, just like that seesaw effect, and probably means there's very little overlap between your investments. But I'd also tie it back to the importance of understanding how diversified or not diversified your investments are. I'd also tie that back to, again, your financial goals. What are you trying to solve for? Because if you end up with two ETFs with the problem of like overlap, so let's say, they tend to move together on a daily basis, and 60, 70% of what's held in each ETF is similar. Well, that's probably not what you want to own if you're solving for that trip in a couple of years versus solving for that down payment in a decade. So just be, really, really mindful that diversification or lack thereof could have meaningful implications for being able to meet your financial goals.
Absolutely. And I think this also ties into our second point where it comes to understanding like what's under the hood of the ETF. So you may think that just because an ETF has global in the name, that it's diversified globally. But when you look into the details, like 60-80% of it is within North America. And maybe you were looking for that international exposure. So then you have to go and find something else.
Correct, but it's like my plants, it's all part of the learning process.
The learning curve. Yep. Awesome. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. So, although ETFs were initially designed to make investing easier, they have come a long way over the past 35 years. Remember to avoid the hype, make sure you understand what's under the hood of the ETF you're investing in, and stay focused on your investment goals. Thanks for tuning into this podcast. And as always, stay curious, stay informed, and stay invested.